Welcome to the second Masterclass of Zeology in the University of Zeology. After the first Masterclass going into biodegradability of leather, today we'll focus on the actual production of leather. So what to do and how to do zeology tanning. With over 60 tanneries globally working on zeology leather, we have picked up a lot of insights, learnings that we want to share with you today. On my left, I have Dirk van Beer, a zeologist in our team. On my right, I have Craig Munro, another zeologist, but experts in the field of zeology tanning. To kick it right off, Dirk, what are the most important things in general to take in mind when you start zeology tanning?
Well, Pim, you start off with quite a heavy question. Would you like a long or a short answer?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Now, let me not bother you too much. There's two things very, very important. I don't know which one is more important, so I named them. One is preparation. Prepare. And by preparation, I mean preparing the pelt, preparing for the tannage. Fiber separation, opening of the fibers, dissolving and removing everything that you don't want. But also details like the pickle, which are not such details after all. How to compose the pickle. And the second most important thing is, or maybe, I don't know, equally important is you need to consider, you always have to realize that zeolite tannage is a tannage in its own right. And that it has to be treated as such. You have to prepare for this, and you have, of course, to have an open mind when you approach it. Because not everything that works for, I call it chrome or GDA, will equally work for zeology.
Clear. Well, we'll start off at the beginning, soaking, liming. We work ourselves through the different processes. So why is soaking so important for zeology tanning, Craig?
We need effective rehydration in order to prepare the pelt for the processes that follow. So effective rehydration, soaking, the removal of globular proteins, cementing proteins, complex sugars. It's important that these are removed so that we can negate the cementing action that they have on the fiber. We must remember too that zeology is very much unlike chrome in the sense that it doesn't dissolve in the same way that chromium sulfate would. It forms a suspension. So yeah, we need to clear we need deep intrinsic cleansing so that the zeology can penetrate and get to where it needed to be.
Mm-hmm. When I talk to technicians working on zeology, the most important words I hear is fiber separation. That is the crucial part of zeology tanning. Dirk, why is that?
Oh, that's a long story. As Craig, as you said it, it's a suspension, it's a dispersion. Zeology is different here. Where chromium, GDA or veg tans are solubilized before they are used for tanning, zeology is simply not. Mm-hmm. Zeology has to be a dispersion, and if you don't treat it well, it's either not properly dispersed, so this is about the preparation, or it's solubilized. This is not what you want. So a dispersion will always yield a larger particle size, and a particle size of a different way of reacting, also something to understand. It simply needs a bit more space, and it's less forgiving with residues that it finds on its way. Okay. So that's about the cleaning part.
When we say fiber separation and more fiber separation that may be needed compared to chromium, are we going to face a lot of looseness down leather making?
No, to the contrary. We find that with the way zeology tends to aggregate during the activation process, that we preserve and if not even improve the integrity of the grain and the performance features of the grain. So a unique point and advantage of zeolite tanning is that you do preserve the grain integrity and grain tightness. But to get back to the opening up, I mean, the calcium is essential in this particular role. We need the effective lyotropic fiber splitting effect. So we get this clear pathway for these large molecular weight zeolite particles that they can penetrate, they can get to where they really need to be and forming these sheets around the collagen fibrils.
If you take soaking and liming, what is the most important thing we have to watch for when running zeology tanning?
The most important thing, that's always one of these questions, it's the sum of many things, but it's to do your homework, to do it properly, to realize that, as you said, Craig, soaking, fiber separation, brine curing, most of the hides are cured, maybe even brine cured. And although at first sight they look good and they are perfectly well preserved, it's not always guaranteed that each part of the inside of the hide is well penetrated and that they're sold. This means that the fibers are gluing together. It's going to be very difficult for a somewhat larger particle like zeology is to penetrate this unless we do proper liming and soaking. I think this is also a bit of a rediscovery of soaking. Soaking is much more than just washing away dung and blood and salt. It should actually lead to effective rehydration of the pelt, because without effective rehydration, the liming cannot take place. The products cannot penetrate.
Clear? So Dirk, fiber separation, what to do? What chemicals do you use?
Basically, it's a simple cocktail. The basic liming chemicals are lime and some reducing agent. And each has its own role. And I don't know how you see this, Craig, but I often have the feeling that we tend to overlook details and that we concentrate on the spectacular, the action of the reducing agents. And we overlook the effects of lime. Because lime, yeah, maybe you can say a little bit more about this, Craig, but lime is not easily soluble. And it has also a swelling action because it's alkaline. And if we don't take care of this, how we add the lime, if we add, for instance, much too much, it's a tricky thing. Because lime may not be fully dispersed. So it blocks the entrance into the hide. It also raises the pH, so the fibers start to swell. Now this is endless trouble later on. So lime should always be somehow ahead of the action of the reducing agents. We look much further than only how well is the hair removed or the epidermis. So how would you in practice do this, Craig? In one shot or two shots, the lime?
Well, it depends on what type of, liming system you're doing. Normally, if you were doing a hair-safe system, you'd immunize with a little bit of lime in the early stages. But yeah, the sort of main thrust of it is given in the body of the liming, around 2% lime as calcium hydroxide. But really to emphasize that its main purpose and importance is for its lyotropic effect on the collagen. We talked about fiber splitting, we've talked about opening up, and the calcium hydroxide is instrumental here. We need to apply it with this in mind. And it's, equally important as the chemistry is the physics, this physical splitting of the fiber so that we can get the zeolite to position it so that it is where it needs to be.
And grease. How do you feel about grease, natural grease?
The sort of hydrophobic nature of grease suggests that they need to be effectively removed. But not only that, emulsified, washed, and removed. So there's this concept of intrinsic cleansing and cleaning of the fiber structure, which is critical for the tanning. You basically have to set the tanning up for success, and it starts in the beam house.
Yeah. Homework done properly, it makes life a lot easier down the line.
Now there's something about grease I would like to add to this from a more fundamental point of view. This says something about the tannage. because, as I said before, and I think as we all realize, zeology is different. And in some respects less forgiving than other tannages, unless you do your preparations properly. Then it's easy. Now, what's so particular about zeology is Greece and zeology tend to have a similar effect on the fibers. They spread. And this has to do with the way of tanning, where chrome, GDA are very much linked to certain active groups, chrome to the carboxylic groups, GDA to the amino groups in different states of charge. Zeology is everywhere. It's not limited to certain active groups. And this is very similar to the action of Greece. So Greece and zeology are in a way competing for the attention of the collagen. And that's why it's so important to remove it, where chrome and GDA can lift off the fat, zeology cannot.
Cool. I suggest we go into the next phase. And I think these are very crucial phases as well, which is deliming and bedding. From a chemistry point of view, we know that zeolites like to react with metals. Calcium is a metal. So what could go wrong if you do a deliming improperly?
Well, as we've discussed, the importance of calcium during liming, critical. During deliming and baiting, we need to remove the calcium. So as important as it is in the liming segment, it's of critical importance that we remove it during the delime stage. And this is because, exactly as you've suggested, this reaction of zeolite with metals, it restricts the penetration and the performance of the zeolite. So we really need to, as much as we've needed the calcium in the initial stages of liming, we need to remove it effectively with particular types of deliming salts as we go on.
Yep. You mentioned different salts. A thing I hear often is the usage of ammonium salts. Do you use them? Do you use them alone? What to expect if you use them?
Well, I don't know how you see this, Craig. Maybe you can say something about ammonium salts.
Yeah. Well, one has to be careful with ammonium sulfate because you have the formation of calcium sulfate, which is insoluble. You can use small amounts of ammonium chloride, create a soluble calcium salt, calcium chloride.
But this again has high lyotropic effects.
Yeah, we have to bear all of this in mind. But there are many other products that one can use. Propylene carbonate is effective. Dicarboxylic acid blends. There are many that, provided that we are actually creating a soluble calcium salt that can be removed. That is fundamental. That's essential in the deliming.
What would you expect, Dirk, if you would do a deliming improperly and you're now in the tanning phase or the crusting phase? What would you see if the deliming was not done properly?
Trouble.
As in?
Trouble. At the end of the line, I would see a leather that is not properly tanned. Because what often happens, and this is also what I learned in school, and it doesn't make sense somehow. Yes, the pickle finishes off where the deliming did not fully did its job. Now, this is something we have to be strict with zeology. If the pickle has to finish the job of the deliming, we get nowhere. It simply cannot because of the pH. And particularly with the zeology pickle, we come to this later maybe, but we use a lot of formic acid for pickling. If not all the lime, the calcium has been removed, first we would form a highly soluble calcium formate, because deliming is all about neutralizing, solubilizing, and then removing. Not only about solubilizing. Now, in the beginning, we would form a highly solubilized calcium formate. And then we add sulfuric acid, and we would have gypsum all over the place, in the float, inside the pelt. No, your pelt should be calcium-free.
Yeah. So basically, say if there's still calcium, you're gonna have issues with the penetration of your zeolite. You'll have improper tannage. You're gonna have hard patches in leather. Okay, so if we take that in mind, Craig, what would be the most crucial tip you can give to tanners that run a deliming or a bedding? What is the most important thing you're gonna want to achieve in those processes before you go into the next phase?
Well, ensure that it's done thoroughly and properly. The baiting, there's never too much adjustment that needs doing, provided you set up the D-lime properly and it's effective. The bait will perform as it should. But yeah, get rid of the calcium, solubilize it and remove it because it restricts the performance of the tanning.
Use the right balance of carboxylic esters. You can always, many people still use some ammonium products, but be aware there's much better ones who do not only the neutralizing but the solubilizing and make it easy for the lime to be removed. So you have the esters of carboxylic acids, they hydrolyze, they release a very weak acid. You have the dicarboxylic acid that you combine with them. It's a very, very specific cocktail. We cannot look into the leather, but we have to test and try it. And always be aware, get the calcium out, because the calcium sits deep. It can be capillary bound. It can be just mechanically bound, large parts that sit there between the fibers. It can also be chemically bound. It needs time
Clear.
and good washing.
Good. So again, preparation, prepare the leather for the tannage. Do that well, life will be a lot easier. Cool. Unless you guys have something to add on the deliming, the bedding, you want to go into the pickle, the pickling phase. As Dirk, you already mentioned, within a pickle we use formic acid, and normally we use formic acid and sulfuric acid. So what's different of a zeology pickle when you compare that to, let's say, a chrome pickle?
Yeah. Something that is important is to realize the roles of the acids. Yeah, now, Pim, this question triggers many answers, so I will try to keep it short. But let's start with realizing all this preparation you did before the pickle was to prepare the pelt. When you start pickling, you only partly prepare the pelt. You prepare the pH conditions, the float, but the pickle has a very, very large influence on the tanning agent itself. And this is something particular of zeology. So the composition of the pickle also determines the success of your tannage. And now I can start off, but maybe you can add something to this from practice.
Yeah, maybe it's good to go into that part that Craig already mentioned earlier, where chromium is a solution, zeology is a dispersion or a suspension.
Yeah.
How is that interacting with tanning? So why do we need to take care of that properly?
Well, let's talk about the conditions that are required first. In order to get the suspension, we need really a fairly high organic acid complement in the pickle. In this instance, it's formic acid, as we've discussed. And this is largely to formulate this dispersion, breaking down the zeolite into smaller carbon copies of the bigger mother molecule to start. So, and then of course there's inorganic acid complement as well, sulfuric, and this is really for pH regulation. We need to get us in this zone of 2.4, 2.7 pH range. However, there's a danger with too much sulfuric, in that you can break down the zeolite into its the consecutive elements, and then you'll get zero tanning action in the end. So this real balance of organic to inorganic acid, this blend is critical and fundamental to obtaining an effective tannage.
Cool. When you say it's really important to use the sulfuric acid and organic acids in the form of formic acid. We had one tannery that did some work with pure sulfuric acid, no formic acid. What can you expect if you choose to do that?
Well, you will get zero tanning action. In this instance, this is what we found. But on the positive side, we were able to rectify the problem. You can, as you would with chrome and rechroming, and this is one of the lovely things about zeology and being able to use it in industrial practice, tannery conditions, is that you can re-zeolite. You can, and things do go wrong in production. We're all tanners, we know. So in this particular instance, there was zero tanning. We were able to repickle, re-zeolite, and we obtained effective tannage.
Save the hides, basically. Okay, but here again, Dirk, I use the words golden rules. All I hear is, if you stick to the golden rules in soaking, in liming, in deliming, in baiting, in pickling, life is much easier. Anything you move away from that is going to create issues you have to solve later on. Stick to the plan. That's the message I get through what you share.
Stick to basic leather making principles. As we've discussed, from soaking, liming, deliming, baiting, if these are done effectively and properly, the tanning should be, you'll set your tanning up for success.
Yeah, but maybe now I remember the time when I was a kid and my parents told me you have to do it like this and you have to hold the fork and the knife like this. I asked why? And they never, they still owe me an answer. Why it just has to be like this. Now, I don't think we can go to our customers, to the tanners, to ourselves, to each other, and say it has to be like this. So perhaps I owe you a little bit of an explanation why this is so, because it actually makes sense. Pickle is not only about pH. We know this from chrome tanning. Chrome tanning you make the right pH for the chrome, but you also need other acids for a certain degree of masking, a little bit of interfering with the chrome tanning agent. Now with zeology, this goes much further. Because as we said, we don't solubilize it. If we would solubilize it, it was easy. You go down too far with in your pH, you dissolve it. But that would mean breaking down the zeolite tanning agent into its constituents, into all its parts, and what we have left is then no tanning agents anymore. So we want to tan with the original tanning agent, but in a dispersed form. Why not use only sulfuric acid? It's too strong. And it misses a vital ingredient. It cannot interact with the tanning agent. The tanning agent needs to be dispersed, as you said. If you go too far down, it will dissolve. And that's killing. We don't want to dissolve it. We need to break it down into a stable dispersion. And formic acid is crucial in this. Don't replace it with acetic acid or something else. Only formic acid, being the smallest, this difficult word, monocarboxylic acid, fits into the structure of zeology. It's a mono, so it does not form bridges. It acts only on the zeolite and also from within. If you have larger acids, they would only act on the surface. And you would get, different fragments. Not very even, not very finely dispersed. And they would not be stable. Formic acid also has a stabilizing effect on this. That's why the golden rule is, don't play with acids.
Yeah, and I think the strong advice that we give to tanners that start off their first zeology tanning, start off with running the golden rules, see where you're at. Once you got some experience, maybe you can start playing around with a little bit, get yourself some new insights, but start off with the golden rules, get some proper leather first, and then you can evade from that. Anything to add, Craig, Dirk, on the pickle? Because otherwise we're going to the tanning phase, which is of course the...
Now I would like to add something. It cannot be said enough, don't play around with acids. And we had, again, the one with the sulfuric acid. Sometimes there is no formic acid, it's out of stock or we don't use it. And then people have commercially available acids. They are called organic acid blends. And that's why I gave this lengthy explanation. Not every organic acid will work. It's just the name. It says nothing. It only tells you it's not an inorganic acid. Formic acid and sulfuric acid. Sulfuric for the pH, and formic for the fine dispersion, and for something else, but that may come from another question.
And your standard indicator check with bromocresol green, so we want a clear yellow cut through the cross-section. That's the only other additional point I think I would add. But the nice thing about the zeology, the process design, is that any tanner will recognize it. The way it's been set up, it follows the conventional tanning steps. So there's nothing really exceptionally unusual. We'll use a different indicator, which we'll discuss later. But your pickle ends with checking with the standard BCG and a yellow strike.
Cool. Going to tanning. In our communication, we discuss plug and play. Zeology tanning is plug and play, which refers to you don't need different machines. You have identical running times. You have a lot of things are like chrome tanning, but it's not chrome tanning. But so let's go into, you start a pickle. How long do you pickle before you actually start your actual tanning?
Yeah, 2-3 hours, as it depends. Give it time. But the pickle with formic acid and sulfuric acid is a very quickly acting pickle. And don't forget, it's just to create the conditions, and this does not take so long for the zeolite to disperse.
Yeah. When you look at the typical recipes that we use, you see different steps of additions of chemistry. What are the ideal steps, and why do we choose to not give all the tanning agents at once? And so, how does that work?
Again, it's about dispersion. It's you'll see. Oh, we're moving now into the tanning segment of the discussion. But yeah, in tanning, our zeolite is added in two additions of 3.5% times 2. And this is, again, purely to facilitate better dispersion of the zeolite. So too much at once would give, we find, a bit of aggregation in the extremities. So dividing it into 2 separate doses, separated with a small amount, a measure of formic acid, again, resolubilizes it as it's added. So the way we've designed the tanning is in a step-by-step method, and it's purely with dispersion in mind.
You mentioned that in between the 2 zeolite additions, 3.5% each, you add a little additional formic acid. I see that in basically all your recipes. Well, why do you do that? Can you go into that a little bit deeper?
Well, it's purely for the dispersing action. We do find these larger molecular structures, penetration is important. We don't want these aggregations in the extremities. We want it to disperse and penetrate. So this is why we offer this formic acid addition, so that we can achieve this effect to best effect.
Okay. So now we have the pickle done. We started tanning. We dose in different steps. We use formic acid in the middle to drive the second addition. How long do we run for tanning? How long does the tanning run before we go into other steps?
Again, depends on the thickness of the pelt. Different running times. But if all the conditions are right, I can't stress this enough. Yeah. 2-3 hours on average for a normal lime split, and thicker, I don't know, 4 hours.
2.8 to 3.2 millimeter split in lime. We're looking at around 3 hours to get the penetration of the tanning agent.
No, sorry, go ahead.
And then there's the indicator that we use to check the penetration, which is the pyrocatechol violet, and it indicates blue in the presence of the zeolite.
We did some research on what would happen if you run much shorter or you run much longer. What's in it for tanner to run shorter? Is, I think, out of line. But what happens if you run longer or much longer?
You mean in the tinning?
Yeah, you run the tanning, so you said like 3 hours, so now we run it like 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. What is it helping you, or is it just losing time?
I would say once it's through, it's through. And then with the pickle done properly, there's a good balance of what's inside and what still has to be attracted to the height. Start the activation. Don't waste time. It won't do any harm, but I would not recommend it either. Okay. Because if you run it too long, why should you do it? Because then one of the qualities of zeology, the tightness, can be disturbed. No, that's not the right word.
Because you run longer, you just stress the height too much.
It's just mechanical action. It's not necessary.
And I think keeping the zeolite in the presence of these acids for a longer time than is necessary, I mean, you're really just going to break them down into
and
these...
And you break them down further, yeah.
And you will affect the tanning action. So don't overdo it, yeah.
Cool. So we're running the tanning. You mentioned we have a different indicator than we normally use. So can you go into that? What do we use?
Well, pyrocatechol violet, as mentioned. And then it's key in the way you take the cut. So we generally would take the piece of pelt and dry it between a paper towel to get rid of the excess moisture and liquor, and then cut it at quite an oblique angle so as to expose as much of the inner surface area as much as possible, the fiber. And then we find that with this extra surface area that's created, we get a nice visual check.
Okay. And don't use too much, I would say. Yeah. Because if you use too much on a wet leather and you cut it in a 90-degree angle, even 5 minutes, it may look fully penetrated. Mm-hmm. So when you check, be critical on yourself. Mm-hmm. Don't make it too easy on yourself and on the indicator to work. Mm-hmm. That's why we have this angle, dip it off with a tissue, and then run it as dry as possible across it. Then you see the difference if they are there.
Cool. So now we have completed the tannage. I think you already mentioned the word. With chrome tannage, you would go into the next step, which is basification. For some reason, we don't call that what we do basification, we call it activation. Why do we call it activation, not basification?
Well, in a way it's a basification because you are adding basic chemicals that react in a basic manner. So not in an acidic manner, but in a basic manner. You add alkalis. So in this way, it's a basification. But we call it activation because with chrome, with metal salts, which zeology is certainly not, it's not a metal salt, the tanning action is not through an increase of the basicity of the tanning agent itself.
Because zeolite cannot be basified?
No, it cannot. It has zero basicity and it will not end with 100 or 50. It will end, nothing changes. The principal action is not based on basicity. There's another reason. It's also not used to distinguish it from metal salts, because it is an activation, and that's what it's doing. It activates zeology into forming a sheath.
Activates, as in it makes the zeology now again reactive, and then it starts the tannage. Okay.
And then it starts the tannage. Part of the tannage has already been initiated, but this finishes the job in many respects.
Correct. What if alkalis are mostly used, or why would you use one or another?
Well, we've three main ones that are used, and that is magnesium oxide, sodium bicarb, and soda ash. We've run many trials in comparisons and found that there's certain properties. At the end of the day, your choice of alkali depends, I think, to a large extent on the type of leather that you intend making. But yeah, the critical phase is this activation where the zeolite forms these sheath-like structures around the fibrils, and this agglomeration, this coming together. You see this coming together of these zeolite particles during the activation phase, and this is where the actual tanning takes place.
Yeah, the sheet forming. If any of you are interested to see how that works, on our website, there's a technical version of Model Z. Model Z is basically showing you what will happen during the process. So I think the word sheeting is used there as well. I think a very crucial part through our learnings is that you choose a pH that fits the purpose. So there's been discussions whether we use lower pH or higher pHs. So what is the conclusion of our learnings over time? What pH is the ideal setup?
If we're in the range of 4.8 to 5.2, we're in a safe range for the end of activation. But apart from the addition of the alkali, what's important is time. We really need to ensure that we have a proper equilibrium of pH through the cross-section at the end of tanning. So one of the other things we do is use the bromocresol green again at the end of the activation to just check that we've got a nice green cut and sort of green-blue cut that suggests or shows that we are in the required pH range.
Yeah, but there I would like to say a word of caution. Yes, but what are we measuring when we use bromocresol green? And that is where time comes in, because the activation takes place quite quickly. These penetrate quickly. This is not the issue. So we easily have the right pH. Mm-hmm. But what we are actually measuring with bromocresol green is the pH of the water. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's of the float surrounding the fibers. Mm-hmm. What we don't know is what is actually happening at the lower hierarchies, where the fibers are very small and thin and separated, where the zeology acts. Mm-hmm. What we see is a very rough picture only. We will easily have a good color with BCG after a few hours, 2-3 hours, but you need to give it time to ensure that the activation also takes place in the deeper layers.
And the activation is just mostly to activate zeology for tanning, or are you also planning to remove the acids that you have introduced earlier in the pickle?
We also want to remove the acids. Yeah, the activation is, a lot of shrinkage temperature already develops at a pH of 4.2, 4.3. Mm-hmm. But that's not enough. You see a gradual increase if you go to 4.8 and to 5.2. But it's not only the shrinkage temperature. Mm-hmm. Zeology is not chrome. We use a lot of formic acid, and this has to be neutralized and partly removed, and we need the pH for this.
Greg already mentioned, let's say 4.8, 5.0. What is about to be expected if you go and you say, look, 4.2, 4.4 is enough. I see BCG is doing well. I ran it for so many hours. 4.2, let's. What is to be expected if you choose to do that, which is not in our golden rules. Our golden rules are 4.8, 5.0. What if happens 4.2? What do we expect with that?
You would have an unfinished intermediate in every respect. Mm-hmm. You would have to treat it too heavily afterwards with alkalis. The job is not finished. It is as it is with zeology. I can't change this, but when you stick to this, it's fine. You can store it for a longer period. If you go further down, it will not be storable except for very short periods. If you are not very high in your pH, if you take shortcuts there, because you may even check the zeolite content in the float and say, oh, but it's gone, so everything is good. Yeah, but it does not tell you what happened inside the ladder. Believe me, use this pH, take your time, and it's not overly long. 6 hours, 8 hours.
It's a bit like the neutralizing in wet end, where you're actually not neutralizing, but de-acidifying.
Yeah.
Okay. So guys, we've discussed tanning. Now, anything to add that where we are now?
Well, when the tannage is done, I would say, please leave it okay, leave it in its shape, leave it as it is, and make use of its special properties. Please don't wash with formic acid, because as I said before, not everything that works for chrome works equally well for zeology. There is an explanation behind it, but I would say just don't do it. If there's no need to do it, don't wash with formic acid before you start the wet end.
If you take your zeolite off a pellet, you put them in a drum, you rehydrate it, you don't hydrate with acid.
There's no need for it. First we take it out and then we want to put it in. Why?
Cool. Anything from your side, Craig?
Yeah, really just to say that, zeology basically ticks all the boxes of a proper tannage, in the sense that it renders the hide non-putrescible to bacteria. Thermostability is introduced to and it's non-reversible. It's a non-reversible.
Cannot be washed out.
We cannot wash. We've done numerous efforts to try and see if we can remove this zeology. It does not happen. So it's a proper tannage.
Thank you both. Thank you for being our guests today. I think it's really crucial to understand that where Smith+Own is aiming at a sustainable leather value chain, we cannot do this alone. We have to work together with you, with other companies, to make that happen. Please feel free to visit our website, neratanning.com, where you have a tremendous amount of information on zeology, on what to do, not to do, supply chain, biodegradability. Well, visit the website. You can also visit the page that refers to the tanneries that are officially shared there. They are able to supply zeology tanning, zeology leather, either in zeolite or in crust or even in finished leather. If you feel that your tannery needs to be there, please contact me and we'll go through that. For now, thank you very much for being with us, and see you in the next masterclass. Thank you.